We'd been trying to live more sustainably in the house we were in before and finding it quite difficult because the house was not designed to be passive solar. It had, the roof was facing the wrong way for photovoltaics, had no rainwater tanks. It was, you know, typical Australian 1970s suburban house. So we had been looking at retrofitting it, and then along came this advertisement that said, you know, sustainable design, passive solar housing and community. And we just thought that's for us. The two things together, the sustainability of the design of the environment and also the community aspect as well. We found living in Adelaide suburbs a bit sterile, you know, big fences between all the houses. Your neighbours can't even come and help you take your washing off the line if it rains and you're at work, with you know, all these huge fences. And where we were before, it was very much a dormitory suburb where everyone was out at work during the day, and when they came home they simply disappeared into their house and you never saw them from one end of the week to the next. So we thought the idea of community was just amazingly better than what we had.
Yeah.
And it has turned out that way in the end, although it was a bit difficult because we built fairly early and there were very few people on the site to start with.
So after a couple of years, you're now feeling like, has it lived up to everything you thought it would be?
I think it's exceeded it in some ways, and maybe it's been different in other ways. I think everyone who's come to live here has found that they had to go through a little bit of adjustment process, because you come in with notions about how community's going to work or how you're going to actually function in the environment, and nothing is ever quite the way you imagine it to start with. So one of the things that happens to people here is they come in and it takes them a while to come to grips with the way our particular community and site and environment and gardens, the way all that functions, as opposed to how they thought it might function. But it's very clear to see that by the time people have built their house, started to do a garden, been here for a year or so, that they really start to understand each other and begin to speak the same language in many ways.
Mm. So how is it different to what you expected it would be?
I think it's much slower to develop. When we actually bought in, we were told that all of these things like a community centre and artists' workshops and pathways through our environment, reclaimed water, wind turbine, etc., were all part of what we were buying into. And the sense was given to us that it would be done and dusted by the time that we actually got in there and built. And of course, almost none of that has actually happened, and in the end, it will rely on our own work to do it over time. And as Linda said, people come in and they're very busy building a house and getting it organised, and then when they've actually done that, they've still got to start a garden from scratch and do that. And so to actually come out and then start to think about, now we've got to build a community house, it's going to take a little while.
In what ways do you find this kind of lifestyle rewarding compared to the city?
Having neighbours where you can just who feel like extended family after about a year or so. You really begin to feel like you know their house almost as well as your own. You know where the coffee is in the cupboard and the where to go to get things. You know who can eat what and who can't eat what. It's a much closer relationship than you would get in most Australian suburban neighbourhoods. We know when a lot of the birthdays are. A lot of the people with kids the others will look after their kids when they go out, and so on and so forth. So It's a closer relationship. It's more like, probably more like what you hear about in traditional village life. We have grandchildren and family 2 minutes walk away.
Was that part of the initial idea when you looked to move here, or
Not the initial idea, but we actually bought a second block thinking they might like it because they were actually looking for a house at the time. And they came and had a look and liked the idea, and of course it's potentially very useful to be near Grandma.
Okay, so you've got 3 generations here.
And there are a lot of, well, there's quite a few families with 3 generations here now.
I think Jackie said there's about 7
Yes.
families with 3 generations.
And that makes it really like a traditional village. So although we haven't been born here and sort of grown up and had children here, it's almost like it's reforming that notion of people moving back into the area together, several generations, to recreate the traditional village.
Yeah.
So I think over time it will act as a traditional village, because I think we're going to see people who grow up here may well stay around, and their parents may be here too.
Mm. So do you think that the kind of, I guess, the classical notion of a family structure is important for the community?
Yes, and it would be a very different community if we didn't have so many young families here. That's been one of the things that's been much better than I thought it would be. When we first bought in, there were some aspects of it that sounded as if it was going to finish up predominantly retired people.
Right.
And it hasn't at all. It's finished up with some retirees like ourselves, but a large number of young families.
How big can a community get before you lose that sort of all-inclusive aspect?
Oh, I think we're at an interesting stage, because the community, when it's fully formed, will be far too big to actually have that, to be about, I think it's going to be about somewhere between 300 and 500 people, which is rather large for sort of having everybody get together all the time. But with it, the village has been laid out, and Linda may have told you about our neighbourhood groups, that we've actually divided it into neighbourhood groups. They may change over time, because the idea is that there might be about somewhere like 10 to 15 houses. So they're groups of about 30 adults who will perhaps work a bit closer together, share a bit more social life because they're close neighbours. If you make those connections with your neighbours, it does fulfil that social need in a very nice sort of close way.